Bună ziua, doamnelor și domnilor! Bine ați revenit la Interviurile PressHUB. Astăzi vă propun un interviu cu un expert special. El se numește Bobo Lo, este unul dintre cei mai cunoscuți și mai trădați experți în relații internaționale pe relația dintre China și Rusia. Vă propun să vedem și să urmărim și perspectiva lui în legătură cu acest mister dacă China va ajuta sau nu Rusia în nou conflict de pe scena internațională. We all know that nowadays among international experts there are a lot of questions, but few answer regarding the ambiguity of the China related to this recent war. And I would like to explain us how do you see this position of China? Will China support Russia or not? Or maybe it will be able to mediate the conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
I think China is trying to balance its relationship with Russia with staying in the international system. So ideally, China would like to occupy a middle position where it is neither supporting Russia, at least not with material support, nor is it supporting the West. So China would take a kind of more or less impartial position, or at least that's how it would like to be seen. China would like to be seen as an impartial party. The problem is China has better relations with Russia than with the West, and that China is seen to be associated with Russia. So China is not an impartial party. It is more supportive of Russia than it is of the West. But China is also worried that if it supports Russia too much, then it could suffer secondary sanctions from the West. But not only that, it will suffer political and reputational damage because it will be associated with a power, Russia, that is behaving in an increasingly delinquent fashion, and also that is behaving like an imperial power. For a long time, China has presented itself as anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, and yet it finds itself supporting an aggressive imperial power in the form of Russia. So this is a difficult position for China. I think initially, perhaps China was hoping for a quick Russian victory, because then this situation would not have dragged on. The world would have been presented with a new reality, a fait accompli. But the problem is that the longer the conflict goes on, the more awkward, the more difficult China's position becomes. It's quite embarrassing for China. So it doesn't quite know how to manage this situation.
I think when it comes to Russia foreign policy, we have to know the 5 fundamental principles, which are stipulated even in their constitution. For Chinese, it's very important to respect the sovereignty of the state and this principle of non-interference. And if you want to analyze what happened before the first invasion of Russia and Ukraine, the Chinese authorities condemn and support the Ukrainian sovereignty, but in the same time criticize the Western influence in the sphere of influence which is related to Russia. And do you believe that this will be the same line which the Chinese authorities will follow to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but at the same time to criticize and condemn the Western influence in Russian internal affairs?
Well, the situation is that the Chinese have become more pro-Moscow since the annexation of Crimea. So the annexation of Crimea in 2014, 8 years ago now, the Chinese position has become much closer to Russia's. So in 2014, it abstained in the vote condemning the Russian annexation of Crimea in both the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. It also has abstained this time round, but its rhetoric, what it's saying, is much more pro-Moscow and anti-West than 8 years ago, compared to 8 years ago. However, the Chinese, so far it's the Chinese support for Russia has been, well, it's not so much support for Russia, it's criticism of the West. I think we need to make a distinction. So China is calling for restraint, for peace, but it's interesting that most of the media coverage in China doesn't use the term war. It is much more pro-Russian compared to 8 years ago. But China is not yet, I think, offering meaningful material support to Russia. So it's at a rhetorical level, the Chinese position has become closer to Russia's over the last 8 years, but in material terms, there is not much difference. China is an important partner for Russia economically. It's Russia's #1 economic partner. I mean, the EU is bigger, but as a nation state, China is Russia's #1 economic partner. But this is not enough to compensate for the collapse of Russia's relations with the West and for basically the implosion of the Russian economy. So China, even if relations expand considerably, China cannot compensate for the West in Russia's overall view. I think what Russia really needs is to somehow manage sanctions so that it preserves reasonable economic relations with the West and expands its economic relations with China. But if Russia's relations with the West collapse completely, the economy collapses, China cannot really help that much.
Do you think that after this war ends, two major distinct blocks will emerge on a United Nations and the European Union on a side, and Russia and China on the other side? Do you see in this black and white division?
I don't. I think it's a mistake to see the world as a kind of new bipolarity between democratic states like the West on the one hand and China and Russia on the other. It's true that China and Russia have close political and strategic relations, but they are autonomous actors. Russia and China function as independent great powers, and they pursue their own individual strategic interests. I think Russia and China, the reason the relationship is strong is because they have shared interests. It's not because they have shared values or norms. So I don't agree with those people who say that this is a new authoritarian alliance. This is a relationship that is based on self-interest, understandably so. So although they have some sympathy with each other's views, both Russia and China pursue their own agenda. So for example, Russia does not ask Chinese permission to pursue its policies in Ukraine. equally, China does not consult Russia to work out what it's going to do with Taiwan or in the South China Sea or in the Asia Pacific region. So, you know, they might keep each other informed, but they do not really consult each other. Russia pursues specifically Russian interests and goals, and China pursues Chinese interests and goals.
Probably it's more pragmatic relations, not it's
Exactly.
an alliances between allies. Yes, and
That's right. I mean,
do you think that the international order will change dramatically after this war, or some experts predict?
Well, it could do, because I do not see Putin stopping until he secures victory. So I think as long as Vladimir Putin sits in the Kremlin, there will be no end to this war, except if there is an unconditional Ukrainian surrender. But there will be no peace as long as Putin sits in the Kremlin. And not only that, it's not just about Ukraine. This is about wider Europe and indeed the state of global order. So I can see, even if, for example, let's say it's possible that in time Russia defeats Ukraine, Putin will not stop there. Putin will continue to push and push. And so I think there is a very real prospect of a wider European conflict. So when you ask me what kind of world we have, anything is possible. I can see this developing into a much wider conflict between Russia and the West.
Your opinion is that China would rather take advantage from this vulnerability, not to have a firm position against or pro-Ukrainian. Do you think that this road and initiative, this strategic project, economic strategic project of the Chinese will be more from the Russia perspective? I don't know how to say. Russia and the Chinese will develop this partnership regarding Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I think the main reason China needs a good relationship with Russia is because it knows that Russia can be a disruptive player. So it's not so much that China needs Russia's active assistance, active help, but it needs Russia not to oppose Chinese interests. So what the Chinese understand is that to develop the Belt and Road Initiative, to expand their presence in the Arctic, they need a Russia which says, basically, that's okay. It doesn't need Russia to help, but it needs Russia not to oppose it, not to resist Chinese influence. And that's why the relationship with Russia is very important. Russia needs China's active help. China doesn't need Russia's active help. It needs Russia not to resist or obstruct or oppose Chinese interests. And that's what, so that's the key, really.
Do you think that I don't know, China will help Russia even with arms or enemy from military support?
It's possible, but you never say never. It is possible, but I think it is not very likely. The point is that Chinese military assistance to Russia would not make much of a difference to Russia, but it would make a big difference to Western and especially American attitudes towards China. So in other words, the benefit to Russia of Chinese military assistance would be small, but the cost to China of helping Russia would be very, very big, and it would greatly increase tensions between China and not just the United States, but other Western countries, such as the European powers, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and so on, EU. Yeah.
Or maybe can you assess a new scenario? Maybe United Nations will try to improve the relation with China because the biggest threat now is Russia, is not China. I mean, everything is changed after the Trump administration, which really encourage an economic war with China. Maybe Biden administration will see a little bit different the relation with China.
Yet in most of the first year of the Biden administration, he continued the Trump policy of hostile policy towards China. So Biden was no different to Trump in pursuing a confrontational policy towards China. So now, so there are basically there are many differences between Trump and Biden, but one area where they're very, very similar is on China policy. This is one of the few issues, China that is one of the few issues where Democrats and Republicans have a bipartisan consensus. They disagree on most domestic and foreign policy issues, but they agree on China. So although Biden now recognizes that Russia is enemy number one, there is tremendous resistance in Washington to making some kind of deal with China, to having a better relationship with China. And so personally, although I think that is what they should do, I don't think that is what is going to happen.
I also read a statement that Chinese authority sees or label this war as an European affair, and they try not to be more maybe absent, not to be a vocal, an active voice to mediate this conflict.
I think that's right. I think the Chinese just want the war to go away. You know, this war is really inconvenient for Beijing. So I think what the Chinese are hoping for is that the war ends quickly, and that it then isn't that China is not involved. So that's the ideal for China, I think, for a quick end to this war, with basically an end to the kind of confrontation and instability at the international level. I don't see Chinese mediation getting anywhere. The problem is there are two things here. Number one, China is not seen as an impartial party. So, to be a mediator, to be a successful mediator, you need to have, in a way, some level of trust from both sides. So it'd have to be the West would have to believe in China as a mediator. Russia would have to believe in China as a mediator. And I don't think there is that trust. So China does not have the credibility to be an effective mediator. The second problem is that China, I don't think, really wants to be a mediator, because it knows that this is an incredibly difficult conflict. And if China becomes a mediator, then it'll worry that it will damage its relationship with Russia. And so I don't think the Chinese have any really serious interest in pursuing, in taking the role of a mediator here.
Thank you, Professor, for accepting this interview.
Yeah, you too. You too. Bye now.